Hello and welcome to today's edition of Route 664, The Road to Human Kindness. I'm your host, Les Winston, and I'm the national spokesperson for socialsocharity.org. That's a project of the Endow America Network Foundation. We are trying to endow America, and we want to use Social Charity to do that. Social Charity is using a charitable gift annuity, charitable remainder trust, or pooled income fund to help yourself, to help your family, to lower your taxes, and also to do something really good for the community. And what we want to do is we want to endow all of the charitable organizations in your community that are doing what they're supposed to be doing and providing for the services of the community. And we want to make sure that they're supported forever by endowing them. And you can help to endow them by doing something good for yourself. And that's through using social charity devices. Those using them properly is important, and getting the professional help to do that is also important. And you can get help from professional philanthropic advisors. If you go to the socialsocharity.org website, they're listed there. They're from all over the country. This is a nonprofit entity. The council is there to provide information to the public, and we want you to get to know the professional philanthropic advisors. They're very important people, and they will be more important going forward as we try and reduce the national debt. We can reduce the national debt by becoming more socially oriented in our communities, not from a federal level, but where we can support the entities that we need to support in our communities, within our communities, without having to pay tax and then have the government return it to us in the form of some sort of grant. That's backwards, actually. We get a tax deduction for making charitable gifts. It comes off our tax return. They want to use our tax money to give money back to the community. I understand why they did that, why they've done that in the past, but that needs to change going forward, and we can help the government reduce their debt by taking that burden off them, and we can do that by using social charity devices. And 664 represents one of those charitable devices, a charitable remainder trust, and we want you to get used to that number 664. Just like you know what a 401k is and a 529, we want you to understand what a 664 is. And we want to use those to support all organizations and endow as many organizations as we can as quickly as possible. And some of the things that we want to do are cultural, and we want to support organizations that are vital to our culture. One of those organizations is the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, and my guest this morning is Allison Burr-Livingstone. And Allison, what's your position with the Boston Symphony Orchestra?
Hey, Les, my position with the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, I'm our Vice President and Chief Advancement Officer, and that simply means that I have the pleasure and privilege of working with a wonderful team of development professionals, including wonderful experts on the receiving side of planned gift activity, as well as also communication professionals. So we're all about sharing the story about what the BSO means to our community, as well as helping our community know how they can support us in turn and make our mission possible.
And how important is the Baltimore Boston?
The other BSO.
Yeah, another BSO. How important to the community is the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra in general?
Well, Les, I'm biased, but I would also note that the BSO is the largest performing arts organization in the state of Maryland. We're actually the only orchestra in the country that has 2 permanent year-round homes whereby we perform our full season in 2 unique markets. So we've got our founding home in the city of Baltimore, the Joseph Meyerhoff Symphony Hall. We also have our second home, the Music Center at Strathmore in North Bethesda, which is in the greater DC area. So we have tremendous reach across the state. We provide music and music education to more than 275,000 residents from across Maryland and beyond annually. Obviously, that's a huge driver of culture, of quality of life, and also supporting our state's economy. The arts are a huge driver, and thankfully, in Maryland, this is a state that recognizes and invests in the power of the arts in that way.
Are you open now in light of what's going on with COVID? Have you been performing, or are you still on hold?
Although our physical doors were closed to the public this past season, our orchestra never stopped. We launched a digital season. I think a wonderful silver lining throughout this incredibly challenging time is the fact that many cultural organizations, including orchestras like the BSO, embraced the power of digital and digital accessibility. So that's going to be a new permanent part of our model moving forward. We are looking forward to returning to the concert hall and opening our doors and welcoming audiences back for a new season of Discovery that starts in September.
I would imagine the musicians would be much happier playing to an audience than they are on Zoom.
Yes, I think the missing sound of applause certainly was very resonated. If that makes sense. We were able to install professional cameras, and we were able to also launch a third concert hall, a digital performance app that people could stream online via their smart TVs, devices, similar to a Netflix kind of on-demand style over the course of the year. So thankfully, we were able to also have better microphone quality than that is limited to Zoom, although certainly we did a lot of activity on Zoom this past year. It's been my go-to for I think every single meeting and a lot of private one-on-one donor events that we've done.
So are you seeing a lot of new philanthropy? Has the COVID had any effect on your fundraising?
Obviously, tremendous effects. The BSO, as is the case with many performance organizations, we are heavily reliant in any year on contributions. In a general year, about 30% of our revenue comes in from earned revenue, ticket sales, facility rentals, concessions, things like that. And then that comes in through annual gifts as well as our drawdown from our endowment. So certainly this past year, when we were doing everything virtually at largely no cost, we didn't have any of that earned revenue coming in. So we were entirely reliant on contributed. Thankfully, I'm so pleased to note that our community has responded. I think this actually is going to be the first year in several years where we will see an increase in our annual membership. I think we're currently tracking about 12% more donor households this past year than we had before. And also, thankfully, the BSO has been able to successfully secure various options of federal emergency relief, which clearly has been a critical element combined with that wonderful philanthropy from individuals in our community that has enabled us to come through this time and be as strong as we are in terms of our poise to return. Obviously, I think these times also underscored the power of having things like a strong endowment to be able to mitigate risk, when you have certainly these tremendously challenging and periods of unknown. We all live in kind of this precarious budget model where we're a nonprofit. We don't have purposely profits annually, right, that are rolling down to the funds. So it, I think, has risen awareness as to the need to support those organizations that matter to you, as well as for organizations to think about the power of not only a strong annual giving program, but strong endowed and planned gift program, as well as the power of having those rainy day funds.
You've been saying the magic word, of course, endowment and endow. And I want to stress to our listeners, to folks out there, if you're listening to this right now and you're an aficionado of the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, the benefit that they get from their endowment is very important. So, and a lot of organizations that didn't have endowments, they've had a lot of problems trying to stay afloat. So, the importance of the endowment to the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, how has it come? I know it's come into play as a result. You just mentioned that, but how much further do you want to build that endowment? Is that endowment fully funding your orchestra at this point?
So the BSO Endowment Trust, which is a separate legal entity, we have pooled audit, but we do have those elements and points of distinction in hand, and a wonderful board of trustees that help to advise and manage the wonderful investments that donors for many years have given to support the BSO and its mission in perpetuity. The BSO Endowment Trust is certainly our largest annual funder. The BSO, prior to the pandemic, had certainly been actually in a longstanding endowment campaign on the recognition that our endowment is not sufficient to generate the type of draw that we would want it to draw based on our budget size. Thankfully, markets through all this have been performing well. The endowment has continued to improve, but we have rooms to grow in the future.
Sure. How much federal support do you get, other than what you got during COVID?
On an annual basis, we mostly rely on state and local jurisdiction funding. So we have
not federal.
In the state of Maryland, not federal. We obviously look for and we have received support from the National Endowment for the Arts, but that's been the core part of our federal support in the past.
The National Endowment of the Arts. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just talk about you a little bit, Allison. You're a chartered advisor in philanthropy, I believe, right?
No, I am a holistic development professional, is what I would.
Okay.
So, but all the more reason why, at an organization like the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, we need to have a number of our development team members who have a wide degree of experience and skill sets. And I'm very blessed and lucky to have two key members of the team who are chartered advisors in philanthropy in that regard. We do a lot of work with our donors, manage our legato circle, which is our association of those wonderful individuals who have made provisions for the BSO in their estates.
Okay, we have a classical music program on Route 664 radio called Classy Sundays. I'm interviewing Mike Paxton coming up with regard to how classical music is so important in the community. And of course, the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra plays a significant role in the area around Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, providing that cultural.
If I can say, my earliest childhood memories, it's Wanda.
That's Wanda, my sidekick. Yeah.
My earliest childhood memories, and I don't need to say how old I am, but those were really great times. But those are my early memories, and I remember walking. I went to grade school downtown Baltimore, and we would walk there. It was just such a fun time, and yeah. So the symphony's been around, and it's a huge part of the community in Baltimore for sure.
Thank you, Wanda.
Thank you for that.
Our music education concerts, I have to digress and build on that experience, Wanda. We were one of the first orchestras in the country to provide concerts for young people. And certainly our midweek education concert series is, something that brings, 30 to 40,000 students to the Meyerhoff Hall to potentially experience their first and only experience of a professional live symphony orchestra annually. That is one of the biggest things that obviously a lot of discussion around students return to the classroom in school. But one of the things that we cannot wait to do is to have students back in the hall and for BSO musicians to be back inside the classroom as well.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything like sitting in an audience when they're playing Beethoven's Fifth and you get the opening notes, still sends shivers up your spine. It's an amazing environment. And I want to thank you very much for joining us this morning on Route 664, the Road to Human Kindness. And Allison, I want to wish you and the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra all the luck in the world to continue being successful. And we'll look forward to listening to some beautiful classical music and spreading the culture.
Thank you so much, Les. Appreciate the time, and I appreciate everything that you're doing to help raise awareness about the power and the importance of charitable plan giving and the road to Endow America.
Yeah, we want to make it easy for folks to do. Make it common sense and logical for them to use Route 664, the Road to Human Kindness, because it's been there for a long time and it's been underused, and there's no reason why we can't support our communities that way as opposed to paying tax, if that's what you feel like doing. So in any case, want to wish you again luck and thank you very much for joining us this morning, Allison. Allison is with the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, and we certainly appreciate all the things that she's doing in that job. It's a very important part of our community and culturally keeps us all together, keeps us sane in a lot of ways. This is Route 664, the Road to Human Kindness, and we thank you for joining us here. We're at the community newspaper facility, and we thank them very much for their providing us with the facility. We're going to be joined now by Mike Paxton, in an interview I did earlier, and we'll see you again next week. Take care. Okay, so I wanted to take some time out to have a chat with a good friend and compatriot in the radio business, Mike Paxton. Mike has been a radio pioneer and a radio veteran for many, many years. We have quite a history, Mike.
We do.
Yeah, I want you to give the sign on.
You know what I like. You know what I like.
Yeah, that comes from.
Maybe we better explain that.
Yeah, so that comes from Funny Money. When I was doing the Funny Money radio shows, and we would be talking about people who were philanthropists and who had given major gifts, and that was what I like. You know what I like.
Right.
Yeah.
The Big Boppers and Julie Leitz.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were the producer, right, Mike, on that?
Right. Okay. Right. And this is how I first met you and met Wando.
Yeah.
Now this is 1360 WKAT, and now before that it was Classical 1360, which kind of relates to the show that I've been doing with you all.
And why don't you tell us about Classy Sunday?
Well, and first I want to thank you, Les and Wanda, for really making this happen. And we started end of June, and it's Classy Sunday. It's on Route 664 radio at 6 p.m. and it's for 3 hours. And we just do some of the world's greatest music. There's usually a theme. This past Sunday, I did the Mighty Five Russian music. I've done Mozart and Friends. I did a show of Scandinavian music by Edvard Grieg and Sibelius. So there's usually a theme involved with it. And of course, around the 4th of July, we did a program of American music as well. And I've got something special coming up this week and the next few weeks too, you know. And so I try to make these approachable works. I mean, not necessarily hits, but approachable works that people know or maybe haven't heard in a long time. Share a little comment about the music. I mean, for example, one of the composers I was played was Alexander Borodin, and he was a 19th century Russian composer. But interestingly, his music had a revival of sorts in the 1950s. The Broadway musical Kismet, which was later made into a movie, they used a lot of his music for some of the hit songs. Like, for example,
which movie was that?
Well, the Kismet. It was
Kismet,
a Broadway play, then
Yeah.
later a movie with Howard Keel and Anne Blythe.
Yeah, yeah. Strange Dear.
And the famous song is one of the famous songs is Stranger in Paradise.
Yeah.
Stranger in Paradise. And the melody from that came from the Pavlovian dances. And then there's another hit song there, and This Is My Beloved, and that comes from one of the movements of his string quartet number 2, which we happened to play just this past week. So I like to share interesting things. It's one of these things, people have heard classical works in commercials and movies, certainly in cartoons and Disney and all the Fantasias and all that, you know. So I try to make it very approachable and certainly not any kind of supercilious look down.
No, my first experience with classical music was the Lone
share
Ranger.
some great music that people know. Well, well, it was interesting.
I do that with my great granddaughter. She loves that, you know.
and it's interesting. I remember growing up, like my mom would put. There was a silly Rice Krispies commercial they did years ago. It's from the Pagliacci Vestilo Juba, and she'd point out this was from an opera. And then things you heard in cartoons, commercials, or TV shows, and that's all classical music. And I was kind of a latecomer to classical music. I didn't really get interested in it probably until my late 20s, because I worked at the old WTMI 93.1 for 15 years.
Wow. Yeah, I remember TMI. That was the last vestige of classical music provided in Miami, wasn't it? Until WVCG, I think. That followed that.
And then we did it on 1360. We did it on 1360.
That's right.
And it's so nice to have this outlet here, Route 664, and not only here in Miami, but through the internet. I mean, worldwide. And because otherwise, you really have to go to something like Sirius XM, and they have a very fine Symphony Hall channel, but not everyone has that or access to that. And so this is something we're missing here in South Florida as a full-time classical station.
Yeah, and you can hear that on Classy Sundays. At 6 from 6 to 9, right on route664.org. Our radio program, which is connected, of course, to Endow America Network, and which is connected directly to philanthropy. And I don't think that the public is fully aware of how important philanthropy is to the maintenance of classical music. What's your experience been?
Well, it's absolutely, because the arts organizations, let me just speak locally, it varies from state to state. They do get a certain amount of funding from the state, a certain amount of funding from the federal government through the National Endowment for the Arts and maybe National Endowment for the Humanities. But really, it comes traditionally through corporate sponsors, philanthropists, and of course, ticket sales. But ticket sales subscriptions, that doesn't cover the costs. And something like Florida Grand Opera, very expensive. They do wonderful work, but that's very expensive to put on those productions. And I've had the privilege of being part of some of those productions some years ago as an extra. They called it supernumerary. So I'm not singing role, I assure you. But no, I'm in the baritone range anyway. Okay. So as you can tell. Yes. But the corporate philanthropy, Les, is, I think, even more important now. I mean, such a venerable organization as the Metropolitan Opera in New York. This goes back to 2019, they were having a deficit. And then you take in last year, most of the organizations were closed. Maybe they made some money streaming concerts or things like that. And I know the Met had some success with that. And I know that Broadway is coming back, and the arts organizations are gearing up for the fall season. But even so, and they were starting, many of them.
If there was one organization here in South Florida that you think best exemplifies, maintaining classical music, and what would that be? I don't mean to put you on the spot. But.
Well, it's okay. I mean, first of all, certainly there's Florida Grand Opera, and then another organization I was privileged to be a part of as an MC for many years, the Miami Symphony Orchestra, which has really grown and developed into an entity. Now, we do have the New World Symphony. That's, as they call it, America's Orchestral Training Academy, and the distinguished conductor, Michael Tilson Thomas. He's the artistic director. Some may remember, I do remember, the Young People's Concerts they used to do on CBS. And wasn't public television, it was CBS and the Young People's Concerts, exposing young people to the music. I remember that when I was a boy, listening to those and learning something. Mm-hmm. So I would say certainly the New World Symphony, the Miami Symphony Orchestra, and Florida Grand Opera. No, we don't have a Florida Philharmonic anymore. And of course, we have Miami City Ballet as well. And there are some small, orchestras. Alhambra Orchestra is one. They get a certain amount of funding, but they're a very small orchestra. And
I have a couple of questions. It's twofold actually with regard to young folks. I'm talking about under 35s.
Okay.
And I wanted to know what their participation is in, or even younger than that. Are they aware of the classical music? Do they participate? And are they part of these orchestras? Are they part of the patrons to these things? How much of an inroads are we making with young people so this will stay alive?
Well, I mean, let me address the performers first. Certainly with the New World Symphony, that's unique in that usually those who are accepted for the New World Symphony are there for 2 or 3 years. Then they move on to the professional orchestra. So this was the whole goal of the New World Symphony. So those are mostly all very young artists, maybe out of whether it be University of Miami or Curtis Institute or Juilliard, who audition and perform for 2 or 3 years, and then with the goal of moving on to a more established orchestra, the Baltimore Symphony or any other organ, New York Philharmonic or any others. Now, in terms of the audience, my experience has been that you do have a good mix of people, and this was something interesting. Opera's not for everyone, but I remember being part of opera productions and attending operas, and you do see a lot of young people. It's fun as a date night, young couples, young married couples. That was very encouraging to see that. It wasn't just people over 39 like us, let's say, who were just going to the opera. I think it was a good mix of people going to the opera and to the concert. So it's very much there. And one of the things, now sometimes you'll see school kids there that could be part of an assignment, even or a credit assignment, go attend a concert or an opera and write a paper about it. But that's good. They may kind of catch the bug there, so to speak, get interested.
It's improving the level of sophistication of our audiences, improving the breadth and depth of their experiences with music. I mean, that music has been around hundreds of years.
Absolutely.
And has persisted for hundreds of years, and it has for a reason. Why? What is that reason? Why has it persisted?
Let me just use a cliche. I think it's timeless music. I think the way it can affect you on so many levels. there's a reason why the music of Bach has endured. And interestingly, in the case, say, of J.S. Bach, this is someone who really wasn't that popular in his time. And this is what's interesting. And it's not only him, his music enjoyed a revival. He was certainly in the Baroque, late 17th, early 18th century, but wasn't maybe until about close to 100 years after his death that his music enjoyed a revival. And I think the other thing is that it certainly hasn't remained static with the development of instruments. I mean, at the time of Bach, you didn't have the modern piano. Even at the time of Mozart, I mean, it was, the harpsichord, the forte piano, and the development of instruments. And the music itself has developed, I mean, over, to small, I mean, this used to be, the classical music used to be sort of the, really for the rich people. You had to have a patron, a rich sponsor, a member of the royalty or nobility sponsoring you, commissioning works. And this is over time going into the 19th century, it really became for the people, the concert halls. And so I think that's one of the reasons this music has endured. I mean, the quality of the music has endured, but it's changed greatly. I mean, opera's changed, certainly with Wagner, and then you get into the 20th century, and the music changed even then. So it's always.
Is there new classical work being created today?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
And how do they determine that to be classical, as opposed to, I mean, for example, A Day in the Life by the Beatles,
okay,
or Bohemian Rhapsody?
okay.
The music could be classical, but because it has lyrics to it, doesn't fall into that category. I mean,
well, it's interesting you mentioned a lot of the rock music has classical roots, or a lot of these performers were maybe classically trained or certainly influenced by it. Now it's interesting, something like with opera, what they've done with opera. I mean, we're not just the Mozart of the Puccini operas, and now they're very modern operas that don't really follow the conventions. I mean, you look at something, for example, like the Who, Tommy, going back years ago, that was a rock opera. The Who, Tommy. That was in the 60s and 70s, early 70s, I think, if I'm not, they made a movie out of it. So that's rock opera, and the music is always evolving and changing. There's good classical music going on today. Artists who maybe we associate with jazz, like Wynton Marsalis, doing classical works. There's a lot of crossover there. So
is that a show? Is that a potential show for you?
Could well be. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, because everybody's familiar with Tchaikovsky and Chopin and Mozart and Schumann and Schubert, and which are very old.
Yes.
Very old music, classical music, and I know that some of it's come through into the pop world, because I remember Jackie Wilson saying one of his greatest hits was to a classical tune, classical music fit to the classical music. A lot of them, which we were talking about before, but it's hard to. I mean, I know that we went through a period where classical music became avant-garde music,
right,
where you were getting cacophonous music almost, which was hard to listen to.
Yes.
Has that remained? Is that remaining popular in any way?
It has. I mean, certainly, which I think you're talking about, the 12-tone, the atonal type music that we had early in the 20th century, kind of shocking for its time. I mean, if you look at something like Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring, or more than 100 years ago, it was so avant-garde, so shocking, it caused riots in Paris that we're a little bit beyond that now.
Right.
But it's developing, and you see artists that we don't necessarily associate as being classical artists or composers continuing to work, and you still have composers, John. I mean, look at John Adams as an example of an opera he composed, Nixon in China, certainly, and telling the story, but it's for those who are, like the conventional opera, may not be their cup of tea, So I think you're going to continue to see this, and you see composers, say for example, like Leonard Bernstein, very easily went back and forth, associated with Broadway music, with the West Side Story music, he and Stephen Sondheim, but then the works he did, Candide, the operas he wrote. So I think you're going to see more of this. And then there's some who are more traditional. They don't really like it if it was composed before 1900, and that's fine too.
Is there a composer today that you particularly think would be known for 100 years from today?
maybe Marsalis may be one. I mean, I think maybe Philip Glass or John Corigliano. These are American composers, or those would be some that would come. Arvo Pärt, who's an Estonian composer, that's one especially. He's just Arvo Pärt. It looks like it's spelled Part, P-A-R-T, but it's Arvo Pärt. Would certainly be another one that I think you'll be hearing 100 years from now.
How do they support themselves? I mean, artists like this, because they're not selling records in the millions. But,
No.
And I know that philanthropy is a big supporter of this, and I want to tell the audience, I want to tell, if you're listening to this because you're a classical music aficionado and you want to support classical music, by all means, you should be supporting the nonprofit organizations that make this available to you. The classical music, the
opera, ballet,
the symphonies, all of those that you had mentioned earlier, the New World Symphony, the things that are based here in South Florida, if you want to support those. But anywhere in the country, you could support this music. And we also want to try and endow that. I know the Endowment for the Arts on a national level is a very big supporter of this, but it's almost a form of sophistry when we pay tax money to the government, and the government then puts it into an arts foundation to give it back to the community. If we could just give it directly to the community, it'd be a lot better, because I guarantee we're supporting a lot of people up there in that Endowment for the Arts. I'm not knocking it.
No, I know what you mean.
I think we can do better. I think we can do
I think
better.
if the money could just stay here locally, if we could have that same amount of money,
exactly,
we don't need the middleman. I don't think.
No, we would like to create. We want to create social charity devices for the support of these nonprofit organizations today, as well as in the future. And if we can create endowment for them, so that they never have to worry about raising money again to be able to get their performances on the air. You know what I like.
And I like, yes.
You know what I like. And I
love it too. And this is something that with the arts organizations that have struggled, and you have musicians having to take a pay cut and probably having to have another job teaching. And that's a wonderful thing. I'm a teacher too. But people who, if they're established in orchestras, they've been there a long time, they're the first violin or first cello, they're probably doing okay, say at a major orchestra, say the Baltimore Symphony or the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. But some of the local ones, well, they often have another part-time job, or they have to sort of look for work, performing at weddings or social events. They have nothing wrong with that, but it's not easy to make a living doing this. And so I think it's difficult for the musicians and the orchestras and the performers to really make to make a living. I mean, they really have to do the touring, and again, nothing wrong with that, performing with the orchestras. But I know from working with performers with Miami Symphony and Florida Philharmonic over the years, as much as they love doing this, they need another source of income. This may be something they sort of do.
Well, you're also going to increase the number of people that be willing to make that a vocation, rather than an avocation. They would rather have that as a job, and if they can do it full time, they know they can get paid enough to do that by working for a symphony that's fully funded. That's a big difference.
That's a big difference, and not have to worry about pay cuts or contract. I mean that's part of it with unions and contract negotiations, but not have to come back for givebacks, and just to make it, their full-time vocation, not an avocation, as you say. And then also, if they do something on the side, a little teaching on the side because they want to, that's great, and we need that, but not to make that so you can make pay the bills. Just you have to have another job teaching or something, or in some other field.
My guest is Mike Paxton. Mike is the voice behind our Classy Sunday program on the Route664.org radio, which is the road to human kindness. And we're very, very happy to have you on board and providing us with classical music. And if you're a classical music aficionado, tune in 9 o'clock on Sundays.
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock.
6 to 9.
6 to 9 on Sunday night on our radio program, that's Route664.org. And thank you, Mike, for joining us, and thank you for helping us put classical music on the air and make it available in South Florida more people and actually around anywhere in the country or in
around
the
anywhere
world.
in the world. And
We're in digital. Yeah.
I've been spreading the word, and again, and I mean this very sincerely, Les. It's a pleasure to work with you and Wanda again, and thank you for the outlet here. Doing this, and it's so great to be back doing. I mean, I've worked in different jobs, different formats in radio, but this is the one that was most my favorite, most special to me, and it's great to be doing it. And I would encourage those classical music lovers who have the means, contact you and set up something. I mean, there's so many worthy.
Yeah, they can help. They can help themselves. They can help themselves, their families, and they can also help the classical music continue.
And it really betters the community. It really says something for the community as well. So I'm very grateful to you, Les, and for the outlet here. And we'll have to do this again, maybe live in studio too.
Absolutely. Look forward to it, Michael. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Have a great day.
You too.
Yep. Thanks for joining us on Route 664, the road to human kindness, and tune in. Route 664 Radio. It's the best music and the best talk, continuous, 24/7. So you can listen anywhere in the world just by going to route664.org. Take care.
Looks like a doctor's signature to me.